natural meaning. You shall not bear the name of the Lord thy God in vain. It might, of course, have simply increased the agony of those "and you call yourself a Christian" moments. But if Imes is right, it would have been much closer to the strong ethical thrust of the commandment than merely verbal abuse or misuse of God's name. Not that that is a trivial matter by any means. And I have to say that I am convinced that Carmen Imes is right. Her case in this book, and argued in great exegetical detail in her published dissertation, Bearing Yahweh's Name at Sinai, a re-examination of the name command of the Decalogue, is that bearing the name of Yahweh is comparable in meaning to the high priest bearing the names of the tribes of Israel on his breastplate and bearing the name of Yahweh on his forehead. He represents, in both directions, those whose name he bears. Similarly, those who bore the name of Yahweh, like those who bear the name of Christ, represented that name before the watching world. Israel was called to live in the midst of the nations as the people who bore the name of Yahweh and made Yahweh visible in the world by walking in his ways and reflecting his character. To bear the name of the Lord was not merely an inestimable privilege and blessing, but a challenging ethical and missional responsibility. This makes eminent sense to me, and its New Testament parallels are obvious. A little more of my own story may explain why I resonate so enthusiastically with the message of this book. My parents were missionaries in Brazil before I was born, so I grew up with a house full of missionary artifacts and a head full of missionary stories. "And you, a missionary's son," was an even more stinging rebuke for the mildest bad behavior, since it felt like bringing disgrace on my own father, let alone the Lord Jesus. I studied theology in Cambridge University, but in my undergraduate years there seemed no connection between theology and my missionary interests. I then went on to do doctoral research in the field of Old Testament ethics. That was a rich field of exploration in which I became ever more convinced that much of the weakness of the modern church is owing to its neglect of the profound ethical message and principles that God has woven so pervasively into the life and scriptures of Israel, and that filter through into so much of the ethical teaching of Jesus and the apostles in the New Testament. But again, this did not particularly connect with mission in my thinking. Then I went to teach the Old Testament in India for 5 years in the 1980s. I remember vividly the moment I encountered the remarkable divine soliloquy that is Genesis chapter 18, verses 18 through 19. Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all nations on earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. Emphasis mine. There, in the 3 clauses of that single sentence of verse 19, with its 2 explicit indications of purpose, so that, we have God's election, I have chosen him, and God's mission, the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham that all nations on earth will be blessed through him. And right in the middle, connecting both of those, we have God's ethical demand, that Abraham's community should walk in the way of the Lord, not of Sodom and Gomorrah, by doing righteousness and justice. That verse united in my mind and heart the 2 great loves of my life in my biblical thinking and teaching, mission and ethics. They became like 2 sides of the same coin. God's mission for Israel was simply that they should live as the people of Yahweh in the midst of the nations, bearing his name in their worship, prayer, and daily lives. And for that purpose they must walk in the way of the Lord. And that was why God had chosen them in the first place, in Abraham, so that through them he could ultimately bring redemptive blessing to all nations. This single verse breathed missional